Hello friends. Let me tell you a story about transport gasifiers and firewood-powered vehicles. About the time when the first engines ran on generator gas. About the golden age of gasifier vehicles when 75% of all cars on the planet ran on firewood. About how oil prices increased 100-fold in just 50 years, and how today, in 2021, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the beginning of gasifier vehicles' golden age. How could people have come up with the idea of driving on firewood? What device pushed them to this idea? Meet the grand-grandfather of transport gasifiers, an ancient dinosaur which birth is lost in the ages. Lost in history so deep that the New Testament was written later. Adam among the gasifiers. The firstborn. Today we call it the blast furnace. Blast furnaces operate as thousands of years ago. The air is supplied from below and the gas comes out from above. In ancient times, there was no reason and nowhere to use gas. Mankind would have used little blast furnaces for artisanal iron smelting for a long time if the technological revolution had not come and metallurgists had not demanded cheap fuel. It was them who turned a blast furnace into a gasifier. Metallurgists of the 19th century were the first to use gas in an attempt to save on coal. At first, they needed gas to heat air supplied to blast furnaces. Technical thought began to flourish in all industries during the Second Technical Revolution in Europe. The first historical evidence of an industrial gasifier built to produce only gas dates back to 1839. German engineer Bischoff tried to find cheap fuel for metallurgical processes to save on coal. And he used peat for this purpose. The Bischoff's gasifier is almost identical to a blast furnace, where fuel is loaded from above, the air is supplied from below, and gas goes out from the top. A year later, the most important historical event happened that made it possible to drive on firewood. In 1840, engineer Ebelmann from Audencourt, Austria discovered a completely different way of turning peat into gas, the principle of reverse combustion. This is how the downdraft gasifier was discovered, which produced gas with 30 times less tar than Bischoff's device. The importance of this discovery cannot be overemphasized. Tarred Bischoff's gas could be burned in gas burners for the needs of metallurgy, but in vehicles, where there is little space for filters, the gas must be as tar-free as possible. Clean gas burns in blue flames while the tarred gas flame is orange. Although Ebelmann had already implemented a reverse combustion method that produced a less tarred gas, there was no good engine to use this gas. It appeared only 20 years later, in 1860. A Belgian of French origin managed to build a tolerable internal combustion engine with spark ignition. Attempts to build an engine had been made before that. But before Lenore, the engines were, to put it mildly, unworkable and unfit for mass application. There were no gas-powered engines yet. Steam engines were in full use. Etienne Lenore's motor followed steam engine principles, but sucked air with coal gas in the cylinders and ignited the mixture with a spark. Modern gasoline-powered vehicles work the same way. It's been 152 years, and mankind hasn't come up with anything better than this principle. The piston moves, the mixture passes in and is ignited by the spark. The motor was compact and fitted on an oak table in the workshop. The public accepted a workable Lenore engine. Technical progress was in full swing. Such compact engines were needed in boats, agriculture, stationary dynamos, pumps, and other appliances. The public had not yet seen such a low-noise engine, so they began to replicate it. All in all, about 500 pieces were produced. At the time when Lenore built his engine on illuminating gas from coal, steam engines had been in use for 100 years. There were horseless carriages, omnibuses, with chauffeurs on behind, translated from the French as stokers, who shoveled fuel into furnaces of the steam boilers, stoking them. Lenore also decided to create such an omnibus, a horseless carriage. Its engine was much smaller and lighter than a steam one, which eventually superseded steam engines. By the way, Lenore also invented the round steering wheel. In 1862, Lenore built a 3-wheeled, 8-seat omnibus that made it from Paris to Joinville-les-Pontes, 19 kilometers away, in 3 hours. This vehicle looked more like a large wooden 3-wheeled cart, but it no longer needed a horse to move. Lenore himself made test rides on it in Paris outskirts. The engine didn't become popular, it still lacked efficiency and power. At that time, engineers did not understand why to make a fuss if horses were much cheaper, faster, more reliable, unpretentious, and did not require skilled service personnel. Public transport, on the other hand, adopted more powerful steam traction. At that time, illuminating gas was produced from gas coal, firewood, oil, etc. The method was not complicated. Coal was put in closed flattened pipes, and a fire was burnt under them. Pyrolysis took place, and gas with a caloric value of about 4,500 kilocalories was produced. Semi-coke remained. Today this method is still used for making charcoal. That time, illuminating gas had been used for lighting streets with gas lanterns for more than 100 years. Just as Lenore created his engine by studying the work of his contemporaries, Nicholas Otto studied Lenore's work, improved it, and began to replicate an improved version of Lenore's engine. Otto's engine had a 16% efficiency compared to 4.5% of Lenore's best engines and consumed 5 times less fuel. And in 1877, Otto patented the 4-stroke engine. This was the greatest technical achievement that would become the death sentence for steam engines in the future. It had more efficiency at a much smaller size. Otto's engines instantly began to be mass-produced. About 42,000 engines, both large and small, were produced at that time. Today, 4-stroke engines are still being produced all over the world. In 2014, for example, there were 1.2 billion operational engines worldwide using the cycle invented by Otto. The engine was completely ready to be powered with firewood gas. It was small and highly efficient, but a compact gasifier had not yet been invented. To put yourself in the shoes of the inventors of the time, imagine that you had to put a scaled-down version of a mini charcoal firing plant in a car. Not an intermittent method of obtaining gas, as in the case of charcoal or illuminating gas, was required, but an uninterrupted conversion of fuel into gas as in a blast furnace. Emil Dowson made the second impetus that advanced the appearance of firewood-powered vehicles after Ebelman in 1879 to 1883. He had studied Ebelman's works and was the first to propose power gas, i.e. gas-to-power engines. It was produced under the same principle as in a blast furnace but had slight differences. Coke or anthracite was put in a large tube lined from the inside. Air was fed from the bottom, everything like in a blast furnace, but steam was fed also from the bottom to enrich the gas. Water displaces air, nitrogen, and gas becomes 50% stronger than blast furnace gas, although almost 3 times weaker than illuminating gas. It was a half-water gas. But even though it was weaker than illuminating gas, the process was non-stop. There was no need to shovel out the semi-coke and rekindle the fire under the pipes. The gas was purified in a barrel with shoveled coke. Water was poured on top of the coke. When the output gas turned blue, it was fed to the engine. Firewood must not be thrown into the Dowson gasifier, the resulting tar would have clogged all the pipes. It was a breakthrough. Not so long ago, it was possible to get gas only from the pipe sitting in its place. Now a gasifier could be placed with an engine on a wagon, which could also be moved by the gas, if a belt was switched from a drive wheel to a moving wheel. This enabled obtaining mechanical energy at any desired place. The photo shows such a wagon with a Dowson gasifier and an 18-horsepower engine. No one even thought of trying to install a gasifier in a vehicle at the time. After Otto's discovery, everyone rushed to interbreed this engine with gasoline. It took a long time to invent a carburetor. And when the engine started running on gasoline, the automobile industry boomed. It was easier to fill a tank with gas oil than to hook up a gasifier on a vehicle. Daimler-Benz produced small cars, while Otto considered big gas engines as the future. He remained a proponent of illuminating gas. A Swedish cartoon from those years shows the superiority of cheap diesel fuel over the Dowson gasifier. Why turn into a stoker when you can use liquid diesel at 7 cents a liter instead of a gasifier? Diesel engines and Dowson gasifiers were in operation in those days in many factories. Only very few gasifiers were installed on vehicles at that time. The first classic gasifier vehicle using wood chips and charcoal as fuel was built by French engineer Taylor in 1900. It was still a blast furnace with fuel loaded from the top and air with steam blown from under the grate. It also included 2 heat exchanger coolers and a scrubber to rinse gas. The firewood was mixed with charcoal so that the gas would not be too tarry. In 1905, Thornycroft built the first gasifier motorboat in England. A good firewood-powered vehicle had not appeared. World War I facilitated the process. World War I required an enormous amount of fuel. And France was the most hydrocarbon-starved country in Europe. The enormous number of continuously produced automobiles required more and more liquid fuel, which France historically did not have. And the military situation hindered the supply of oil and its products. It was not only France that suffered. The unleashed war hit the fuel supplies of many European countries hard. The French military ministry and the invention department urgently searched for a national fuel. It had to be cheaper than gasoline and not require changing engines. There had already been a lot of vehicles produced by that time, and no one wanted to redesign the engines en masse. France started looking for inventions and summoned handymen. The first 5 gasifier tractors and 5 gasifier trucks took part in a competition held in Casablanca. The first gasifier truck went on a 140 kilometers long tour in French European territory in 1914 from Paris to Rouen. No particular success was achieved in creating a normally operating appliance powered with cheap fuel. The first gasifier bus was created. It began regular services between the above-mentioned cities of Paris and Rouen in 1916. And if there is a demand for the invention and it is possible to make money on it, there will be a person who will make it. Inventor George Imbert was talented in everything and came into the gasifier business having already built a plant to produce synthetic fuel from coal. And while many inventors failed or gave up, this man managed to bring transport gasifiers to a perfection that is almost impossible to surpass today. He made firewood-powered driving possible per se, and many companies selling gasifier vehicles appeared at that time, just as there are many smartphone manufacturers worldwide today. Let's go in order. To the best of my knowledge, Imbert was the first to patent the horizontal gasification principle, subsequently picked up by McDonald and perfected by Gouin-Poulin and transverse transport gasifiers. Gouin-Poulin began his journey in wood-fired vehicles from this gasifier. He came to Paris in 1921, apparently for a competition, having covered 500 kilometers in his car with a gasifier. According to the data available on the web, it was apparently a transverse charcoal gasifier. An exact description of his device didn't reach us, or I could not find it, but the public and the business community were very interested in it. To give you a better idea of the difficulty faced by the inventors of those days, let me give you an example. In 1920, a 30-horsepower gasifier for a stationary engine with a gas cleaning and rinsing system weighed 3 tons. 300 kilograms of gas had to be constantly purified by water hourly, and there was no idea about how to hang it all on a vehicle and supply it with so much water. A completely different miniature system was required. Just as 9 women cannot give birth to a child in 1 month, so an inventor, no matter how talented, cannot create a perfect gasifier in the shortest possible time. It took Imbert 13 years, from 1920 to 1933, to create a perfect sand-glass-shaped firewood gasifier. In addition to his talent, he was supported by the state and received money from selling his licenses. He also owned a factory and a testing laboratory and hired designers. Let me show you how Imbert's transport gasifiers evolved. They were the industry's flagships. The diagram shows the evolution of gasifiers by year. Since 1921, the gasifiers have undergone many changes, and you can see how Imbert made a downdraft gasifier in 1926. In 1929, he improved it by heating the firewood hopper with exhaust gas. This improved the efficiency by making the gas less tarry. A check valve was installed to prevent smoke from escaping when the engine was stopped. The legendary hourglass-shaped firebox appeared in 1933. The same year Imbert flirted with the monorder trying to remove moisture, but later it turned out that the fully heated hopper gives more advantages than the monorder dumping fuel moisture. A weak point was discovered: cold air warped metal tuyères while entering them. So in 1937, Imbert decided to feed air to each tuyère by a separate pipe. Imbert also patented another improvement not shown in the diagram. He surrounded his gasifier with another air heating cylinder and, thus, enabled using fuel with 35%, not 25% humidity. Of course, this is a summarized story not including many other improvements and experiments. A series of films could be made about them well exceeding this video. Let's go back to 1921. Imbert attracted attention by showing his successful gasifier. But the gasifier car competition held the next year, in 1922, was won by the British. Despite World War I being over, the French military remembered the gasoline shortage well. During the war, a liter of blood had literally to be given for a liter of gasoline. So, they continued funding the transport gasifier's development. Italy and Ireland, England, as oil-starved as France, initiated the wide use of gasifiers in their colonies. In addition to Imbert, other inventors also made transport gasifiers. For example, a customer could choose among 25 different types of gasifier vehicles in France in 1923. Mass production was already underway. But it was Imbert who received a French government order for a firewood gasifier in 1923. A year later, in 1924, the low-tar firewood downdraft gasifier appeared. 1/5 of France is covered with forests. There is plenty of wood, but no oil. A firewood gasifier is required. In 1924 to 1926, Imbert created a downdraft gasifier. It took 3 years from the initial order to a finalized prototype. But even this prototype was not particularly effective yet. It gave a lot of tar and consumed a lot of wood. The French customers were not happy. Inventors could not overcome firewood, the gas was too tarry. Charcoal and coal-fired gasifiers were mostly used. But firewood was much cheaper for the French state, so state orders for the invention continued. In 1923, when Imbert received an order from the French government, he also considered himself a patriot of Germany. So, he wanted to push the technology in his home country as well. In 1925, England stopped subsidizing solid fuel vehicles. English gasifiers had poor quality, and engines wore a lot. The British decided to fill gas and rubber bags on vehicle roofs from the street illuminating gas pipeline because this was the wood gas ancestor, but gasifiers were not abandoned for good. Several companies made gasifiers in the UK. The English tended to use hard coal and charcoal. Hardly any wood was used. World War I also hit the fuel supply of the island parent state. In July 1916, drivers discovered that they could not buy gasoline. Only chosen ones obtained it on cards. A solution was found in the form of gas bags or cylinders on the roofs and illuminating gas from the municipal gas pipeline. The bags were made of rubber and silk or other fabric. They could be repaired like a bicycle wheel. On cars, bags were placed on wooden beams resting on bumpers. The bags were attached to the roof with rings and straps. Fabric bags were cheaper than metal cylinders, and the deflation indicated how much gas was consumed. Today, natural gas filled in cylinders has a declared calorific value of 7,600 kilocalories. Illuminating gas had 4,200 kilocalories, i.e. it was 55% weaker than natural gas. Sometimes bus cylinders were covered with fairing housings that hid the crude construction. Advertising could be placed on such fairings. The terrible aerodynamics of such bulkheads, of course, increased fuel consumption. The tank could be torn from the roof at excessive speed, so a maximum speed of 50 km per hour was recommended. And, of course, low bridges and spans were a big problem. Smoking was strictly forbidden at gas stations, but unfortunately, illuminating gas pipelines exploded here and there in the UK.
Early reports stated that one person was killed and several were injured. Falling glass was responsible for many of the injuries. 50 shops had their windows blown out. Police kept the area clear in case of danger from falling masonry, which might have been rendered unsafe by the force of the concussion.
Although the UK went the way of the inflatable gas bags, there were 1,500 transport gasifiers on its roads by 1939, and several companies were producing gasifiers of their own designs. Cartoonists could not overlook the bulky cylinders. For example, buses with such gas bags were used in China until the late 1990s.
Gadgets of the last war emerge as the rigors of the present conflict increase. Things are bad indeed when the old gas bag is resurrected to supply the motive power beneath your bonnet. However, to mention one of the good points of this antique invention, you can smoke without fear of touching off the gas. The bag contains the equivalent of 1 2/3 gallons of petrol, and if you wanted to drive 50 miles or so, they'd have to heighten the bridges for you.
Car rallies, exhibitions, and competitions for transport gasifiers went on all the time. There were 10 rallies of gasifier vehicles in France in 1924 to 1939. In 1927, in France, there was a big competition rally of military trucks with carrying capacities from 3.5 to 5 tons equipped with gasifiers. 17 companies participated in the contest. Cheap oil flooded the market at that time. Pennyworth gasoline and diesel made gasifiers not particularly interesting financially in 1920 to 1938, but the inventors did not stop their work. On August 3, 1926, the French government reduced the gasifier vehicles tax by 50%. In 1928, the inventor Gowen made a breakthrough transverse gasifier. Imbert was the first to patent it, McDonald was the first to improve it, and Gowen perfected it and put it into mass production. It became the most convenient and popular gasifier both then and today. The only disadvantage is that it only runs on charcoal. the Japanese government paid a citizen 300 yen for the purchase of a gasifier vehicle. In 1929, there were already 1,880 gasifier vehicles, 2/3 of which belonged to the French army. Even though Imbert made a wood downdraft gasifier in 1924 to 1926, it was not perfect until 1931 to 1933. A fateful meeting between Imbert and the talented entrepreneur Linneborn took place in 1931 at an exhibition where Linneborn was delighted with Imbert's gasifier and subsequently bought the rights to produce gasifiers from him. Thus, the German division Imbert Köln was established while Imbert had his own headquarters in Saarland, France. From 1931 to 1939, Imbert Köln adapted and improved the wood gasifier. Linneborn bought the license to produce gasifiers everywhere except France. In France, they were produced by Imbert. Soon the production of Imbert gasifiers started in Germany. Wood-fired trucks and buses appeared on the streets. As it often happens, the public became cognitively disoriented and the daily newspapers soon published mocking reports that drivers would cut down all forests and roadside trees, as well as fences. Of course, this did not happen. The momentous move of the center of the world's gas generation industry to Germany began. But not immediately. While the development of gasifiers was vital and pushed hard in France, Germany was not so much dependent on hydrocarbons. While dozens of companies were producing and selling gasifier vehicles across Europe, there were only 88 approved transport gasifiers in Germany in 1938, even though this country began subsidizing gasifier production in 1935. This happened thanks to the Forestry Committee. Wood sales fell, so it was decided to sell wood for firewood-powered vehicles. The tax was reduced for vehicles running on unsaleable fuels like wood, anthracite, lignite, coke, etc. by 50 to 75%. But mostly wood was used. At the same time, the tax on imported liquid fuel was raised. The second man in the state, Germany's chief forester Hermann Göring, was responsible for this. Some people wondered how quickly the law was implemented. But nothing surprising, it was supervised by the second Nazi of the country after Hitler. However, the law was effective until March 1938 when it was repealed. It would be unfair to say that no one wanted to make gasifiers in Germany at all. I.e. Pinch Company stopped testing and producing transport gasifiers in 1926 after some floundering. Germany preferred diesel. The small number of operational gasifier transport was equipped with imported French Imbert gasifiers. In 1938, only 0.3%, or 1,070, of Reich's 365,731 trucks were gasifier-powered. As I said, there was a lot of cheap gasoline, liquefied gas, and diesel. German economists calculated that if converted to firewood, a bus could run about 40,000 kilometers. That was the life cycle of a gasifier, and compared to gasoline fuel efficiency, it allowed to save only 33% of gasoline. And even though Imbert had been perfecting its firewood gasifier for more than a decade, and Linneborn was finalizing the system in Germany, the gasifiers failed to sell. For example, Imbert Köln, the largest German gasifier manufacturer in 1931 to 1937, managed to sell only 200 devices a year. Once again, a war changed everything. Imbert Köln production rose to about 6,000 already in 1940 and to about 20,000 in 1941. The center of global gasifier production now shifted from France to Germany. In 1938, there were already 1,500 wood billet and charcoal fueling stations in France for gasifier vehicles. Drivers of these vehicles were trained in special schools. The French saved 75% compared to gasoline by using firewood. 100,000 trucks, 30,000 tractors, and hundreds of river barges were in operation in France already in 2 years. In 1942, 36,000 tons of charcoal were produced in France for transport. Besides, gasifiers literally helped to survive. They produced energy for sawmills, electricity generation, stone crushers, pumping stations, etc. Because Germany was rich in lignite, a large number of gasifiers were made for this fuel. By the way, Imbert made a gasifier for German lignite in 1938. Just at that time, in 1935, when Göring supervised gasifiers, Stalin personally opened the Scientific Automotive Institute to develop the Soviet-owned automobile and gasifier industry. And not only this, but all industries in general. The USSR began its own industrial revolution, just as in Europe. It differed from the European Revolution because 5-year plans were established to accelerate industrialization. The USSR's top leadership also expected a war, and Stalin announced in one of his speeches, "We are 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. Either we do it, or we shall be crushed." Whereas in Europe there were courts where any inventor, like Otto, Berliet, or Renault, could defend his patent and start a company to produce cars or trucks, the USSR abolished private property and applied its whole might through institute engineers and scientists as part of the plan. The Soviet Union began to deal with gasifiers in 1935, while in France, the first tractor ran on firewood already in 1908. There was no time for inventions and discoveries. Ready-made technologies were studied, copied, and then replicated en masse. Copies of the Imbert gasifiers, copies of the Göring-Poulin transverse gasifiers, etc. The Soviets simply copied the best and most popular designs. Production and development of gasifiers were extensive in the USSR. A lot of talented scientists improved Western models and invented their own, and, honestly, there is so much information about this period that it is enough for a separate video. I will not go into the USSR gasifier developments in this film. Let's return to the world center of gasifier thought. The first charcoal-powered airplane was launched by Ernst Winst. It consumed 34 kilograms of charcoal per hour of flight. The introduction of gasifiers could not help but cause public cognitive dissonance. The press was full of caricatures. The emergence of the Imbert gasifier in Germany gave rise to the proverb, "God invented Imbert with the rattling grate in his anger." The grate had to be shaken to remove ash. A number of world-renowned companies that are now in the public eye, such as Renault, Ford, Opel, Citroën, Peugeot, Mercedes, Fiat, Skoda, Volvo, Electrolux, and others produced transport gasifiers on their assembly lines. You probably didn't know it, but Atmos, a modern Czech solid fuel boiler manufacturer, was founded as a family company in 1935 to produce transport gasifiers. Mass production of gasifier vehicles emerged thanks to the French military, who experienced World War I and the lack of liquid fuel the hard way. When Hitler came to power, Germany took the baton, and all for the same reason: an acute shortage of oil during World War II. World War II was the first war in history where engines were massively used. Whereas horses had been used for warfare earlier, Hitler staked on a blitzkrieg, so the troops were motorized as much as possible. All fuel was to be sent to the front. The army devoured colossal amounts of liquid fuel. According to some assessments, 15 million tons of liquid hydrocarbons were burned just monthly. Germany and captured countries, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Alsace, and Poland, produced only 1.3 million tons of fuel per month in 1940. Synthetic gasoline made according to the Fischer-Tropsch method in gasifiers from German lignite yielded 4.4 million tons per month in the same 1940. That's why all Tiger and other tanks were also gasoline-powered. Totally 5.7 million tons of gas were produced per month, and 2.3 million tons were imported. An acute fuel shortage forced to take all the gasoline from civilians in the rear to the front. All cars, tractors, and trucks had to run on firewood, charcoal, briquettes, etc. The Germans simply forced all the countries they conquered to switch to gasifier vehicles, although the people were not really keen on this idea. The cunning Italians tried to drive on gasoline but switched to firewood before German checkpoints. The Germans prepared for the introduction of gasifiers in advance. The Munich Technical Driving School trained 10,558 gasifier transport drivers in May 1940 to September 1, 1941. By the time the Germans captured France, Imbert's company was confiscated, and the inventor was forced to work there as an ordinary employee, although he considered himself a German patriot. In contrast, Linneborn, who had bought the rights to produce gasifiers in Germany, immensely expanded his business. However, the Germans took Linneborn into their hands after a short period as well. Due to an acute shortage of liquid fuel, Göring decided to establish a central gasifier point on May 30, 1942, and 30 different gasifier models were tested 2 times in 1943 to select one for mass production. And once again, the Imbert gasifier won and became an ideological symbol of the German people's resilience. In 1944, Imbert personally received the cross from Hitler for making one type of gasifier for mass production. Many companies had produced gasifiers in their own way before that. The press called Imbert the Holzgaspapst gasifier's father the same year. Germany began to develop a network of firewood fueling stations, warehouses located at a certain distance apart like regular gas stations today. There were about 2,000 of them, planned to be 3,000. In the Soviet Union, by the way, the same stations were placed every 60 kilometers. Workers deported from the occupied countries worked at the Imbert coal plant. In 1941, the UK went back to gasifiers and tried to introduce coal-powered public buses like Germany in Europe. The UK historically had plenty of coal. 25 buses rode in London until 1943 and were abandoned because of whatever reason. Although in 1939 there were 1,500 gas-powered buses on the roads of the parent country. Like it or not, convenient or not, it was necessary to move around, and already by the middle of World War II, 10,000 gasifiers were on the roads. Brands of British gasifiers were Hans, Coster, Coel, HSG, Benford, Dupuy, and Dagmar Jones. Basically, they all ran on coal and charcoal. The Germans also used Imbert gasifiers for military vehicles. To save liquid fuel, gasifiers were put on tanks in tank driving schools. Panzer II tanks, that had accounted for 38% of Germany's tank fleet, became obsolete in 1943. Turrets were removed from them to train tank crews. Panzer III was also used for training. These tanks were heavier and consumed more fuel. Apparently, gasifiers were not installed on them, at least I could only find a photo with compressed illuminating gas cylinders. It was not allowed to go to the front with gas cylinders as they would explode from the first hit. The same compressed illuminating gas cylinders were also used on the Panzer IV. Panthers copied from T-34 also rode with compressed illuminating gas cylinders in tank schools. Training Tigers with removed turrets also rode with illuminating gas cylinders. Panzer 38 tank chassis was used for self-propelled guns and artillery. Gasifiers were installed to save on gasoline on a shooting range. At the same time, semi-tracked SD, KFZ .251 infantry vehicles rode with gasifiers also at the front. According to unverified reports, American pilots saw a Tiger II with gasifiers by the end of the war. Equipped with a 22-liter gasoline engine, they would burn about 1 cubic meter of wood per hour. In my opinion, hardly anyone would want to load 1 cubic meter of firewood by hand every hour. The Wehrmacht had a total of 500 combat vehicles and about 12 Panthers with gasifiers. Never before or since has gasifier transport flourished so much as it did during World War II. 75% of all transport on the planet ran on solid fuel using gasifiers. About 1 million units. The Imbert Coal Company produced about 500,000 gasifiers in 4 years, from 1941 to 1945. The German division of Ford began producing firewood-powered buses with Imbert gasifiers. Ford was located next to Imbert Coal. Wumag, MAN, Mercedes, Sauer, Henschel, Bussing, and NAD trucks, tractors, motorcycles, and even small mopeds were produced. Masses of ships and trains ran on firewood. Everything that had an engine ran on firewood in the rear. At that time, there were about 100 companies in the world making gasifiers for anything that moved. All public transport worldwide got gasifiers. But this didn't happen in the US. It only exported gasifiers. Apparently, it had no problem with liquid fuel. When converted to generator gas, gasoline engines immediately lose 35% of power and diesel engines lose 20%. However, that didn't prevent loading buses to the brim. The cartoon caption reads, "How could one say that gasifiers are low-powered?" Hitler forced the whole of Europe to switch to firewood and forced car manufacturers to make only gasifier cars, tractors, etc. For example, Louis Renault was forced to give in to the Nazis and produce tens of thousands of transport gasifiers, including about 32,877 for the Germans. The shortage was very acute. Wehrmacht armored troops General Guderian and General Hoepner, who led the 4th Armored Group involved in capturing Moscow, reported a 50% shortage of fuel for their armored vehicles, which were not even fully assembled. The Chief of Staff of the Army High Command Halder was 35% short of fuel. The Chief of Army Group South, the gifted strategist Manstein, was 30% short of fuel. All this shortage led Hitler to Stalingrad. The city of Baku, which knew no war or trouble, supplied fuel for the Soviet army. Hitler was short of the oil taken from all of Europe, then he was short of the oil taken from Romania. He wanted to get even Baku oil. To avoid encircling, the Nazis had to first take Stalingrad, where the backbone of fascism was broken in 1942, as we know. After that, the Germans were only retreating. The war required so much fuel that hundreds of thousands of gasifiers that saved it were no more helpful. Imbert Köln alone had produced 500,000 gasifiers. And there was a total of about 1 million gasifier vehicles in operation in Europe. Europe's rear saved Hitler 45 million liters of gasoline each month after transiting to gasifiers. Fuel was procured on an industrial scale. The video shows a Lapland plant in 1942 producing charcoal for transverse gasifiers the Wehrmacht, and also the rear, were fond of. Quick start, no tar, no smoke, no smell, and easy handling made these gasifiers popular. In May of the same year, Hitler's friend and Germany's chief forester Göring, who supervised gasifiers, said, "I am talking about the necessity of making Germany, as well as the occupied territories and subordinate lands, to a large extent, independent of liquid fuel as soon as possible. I would ask you to vigorously support the efforts of the Central Office by the increased use of gasifiers."
На братских могилах не ставят крестов, и вдовы на них не рыдают. К ним кто-то приносит букеты цветов, и вечный огонь зажигают. Здесь раньше вставала земля на дыбы, а нынче гранитные плиты. Здесь нет ни одной персональной судьбы, все судьбы в единую слиты. А в вечном огне видишь вспыхнувший там горящие русские хаты, горящий Смоленск и горящий Рейхстаг, горящее сердце солдата. У братских могил нет заплаканных вдов, сюда ходят люди покрепче. На братских могилах не ставят крестов, но разве от этого легче?
In 1944, the Americans took Sayre, the town where Imbert had the chalet and the gasifier factory. He was not arrested. His factory just passed into Ford ownership. Not so long ago, Imbert considered himself a German patriot and a nationalist with a quarrelsome character. He received the highest award from Hitler himself. Now he became a nobody. He lost interest in life. Besides, his son was killed on the Eastern Front. He blamed himself and eventually drank himself to death in 1950 at the age of 66. There was no more need to save fuel after the end of the war, so there was also no more need for gasifiers. The demand subsided. In January 1949, Imbert Köln fired 550 workers, and in 1952, the factory closed its doors for good despite retraining efforts. The cheap oil that flooded the market killed the gasifiers. The market was flooded with cheap oil after World War II. We can still hear from our fathers that gasoline was pennyworth. Fuel cost 4 kopecks per liter in the Soviet Union in the 1960s. Careless drivers poured it into ditches and wooded areas all over the country to show that they were driving and working while they were not going anywhere. But money was paid for this fake work and it was considered okay all over the country. A minor revival of gasifier transport occurred in 1973 as a result of the oil crisis. The OPEC countries, Egypt and Syria, decided not to supply oil to the United States, Great Britain, Japan, Canada, and the Netherlands for their support of Israel in the Yom Kippur War against Syria and Egypt. The price of oil quadrupled. It would have been fine if the price had just gone up. There was no fuel at all at a lot of gas stations in the US. Miles-long queues for gasoline were standing in the early mornings. Nixon urged the nation to save. In Holland, those who exceeded the electricity consumption limit risked imprisonment. Americans treated gasoline as something usual they took for granted, something that would be cheap and would always be. Accustomed to buying cars with big voracious engines, they stooped to stealing their neighbor's gasoline. Many bristled up with guns warning thieves, no step further. The profiteers immediately stepped in. Why wouldn't they make money if gasoline had become scarce? The crisis hit the auto industry immediately. Automakers that used to produce cars with big engines, i.e. Chevrolet with its 6.5-liter engines, were forced out by Japanese small cars. The consequences of the oil crisis were felt for many years. Today, as back then, 60% of the US economy sits on an oil needle. Businessmen who had plenty of money were forced to hitchhike on the roads. So, due to a lack of gasoline, people turned to gasifier vehicles again. The technology had been already lost as it was not trivial. Somebody remembered something, others had books in their closets. Small meetings of gasifier vehicle owners were carried out in the US. But everything went back to normal after overcoming the crisis. And today, people all over the world pay a price 100 times higher than the original gas price. Today, all countries have begun to abandon gasoline and diesel cars, realizing the very near end of the oil era. Electric and hydrogen cars are on the way. Wealthy countries are legislating a ban on internal combustion engines based on the Otto cycle, which has served and is still serving the mankind for 150 years. Naturally, rich countries will have their hydrogen filling stations and thousands of hectares of solar panels. They will lay cables all over the country and quickly install electric car charging stations, spending hundreds of billions of dollars for this. That's what they are already doing. In my opinion, the fate of poor countries is unenviable in the coming years. Hydrocarbons are the foundation of civilization. There will be neither progress nor growth without them. I believe that mankind is about to face a severe energy crisis as there has never been before. We will see oil wars and no gas signs at gas stations again. And there will not be enough fuel oil, natural gas, or coal to generate electricity at thermal power plants, leading to rolling blackouts. And in order to charge the electric car, it will be necessary to start a gasoline electricity generator. Then there will be another renaissance of gasifier vehicles. It seems to me that this will happen in the next 10 to 20 years. Well, we'll see.